This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in the end, the controversy over recalling Mayor LaToya Cantrell was not as much about the outcome, but how the votes were counted, and that controversy may be continuing. While the mayor apparently will hang on to her job, a study this week showed how police jobs are more attractive in the suburbs than in the city. Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon is leaving his job by choice after overseeing the complexities of regulating insurance. We'll look at these stories as well as the upcoming elections in Jefferson Parish and the New Orleans City Council pondering short-term rentals. Joining us are Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, and Michael Finch, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Blake Paterson, Jefferson Parish reporter for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Clancy Dubose, political editor, Gambit Weekly. All right, Clance, we're going to go over to you and what happened with this recall?
Well, it's been kind of a mess from day one. There are some hard-earned lessons. I think in one way this was a giant civics lesson, not only for voters, but for a lot of elected officials. And I'll sum it up by what Silas Lee said after the votes were after the signatures were counted. There's still a crisis of confidence in the city. So that's an issue that's going to continue. But the recall is pretty much literally all over but the shouting, and there's still some shouting going on. But I think one of the big takeaways is LaToya Cantrell didn't necessarily win as much as the recallers lost. She didn't have to do a whole lot. She made some effort, but this thing was just apparently not very professionally run, despite an infusion of $1.2 million that we know of, possibly more, and we'll see that when additional financial reports come out. And pretty much, if you think about Murphy's Law, pretty much every legal and political issue that could go sideways did, from the judge who presided over a lawsuit signing the petition and not disclosing it, and then not recusing herself, to the signature bar not being reached, for bunches of numbers being thrown out by the recall organizers, and they put out an ad saying we're only 1,029 votes, signatures shy of reaching our goal, and when the signatures were actually counted and validated, they were 18,000 signatures short.
And then, of course, there was the Secretary of State and his decision, too, which also confused a lot of folks.
Transparency was an overarching problem for everybody involved. Let's start with Secretary of State Kyle Odwan. He, as a result of the lawsuit filed by the recall organizers seeking to lower the signature threshold for putting this on the ballot in a referendum, he picked a number, 25,000, and reduced the number of active voters in Orleans Parish by that amount without actually tossing anybody off the rolls. That's what lawyers call a legal fiction. But why that number? Was it imaginary? Did he just pick it out of thin air? We don't know. He didn't tell us what his thought process was on that.
And the mayor has filed suit about that, has she not? And she says she's sticking with it?
Yes, she said, and you know what? She has a good point, because it sets a precedent. If you read the law, it's not clear that while the Secretary of State is officially and specifically charged with ascertaining the number of active voters in a given jurisdiction when there's a recall, he does that when the recall petition begins, when he's first served with a copy of the recall, we call it the petition, to begin the process. Well, he did that, and he picked a number just shy of 50,000 based upon what was on the Orleans Registrar's rolls. Then when the recallers sued, he settled the case and said, we're going to pick another number, and he lowered it by 25,000. The law doesn't say he has the authority to do that. It doesn't say that he doesn't have the authority. So that needs to be clarified either by the courts or by the legislature or both.
But the registrar of the parish where this recall is being held, in this case Orleans Parish, they
been
have
some
the
questions
sole
raised.
jurisdiction over certifying or decertifying.
Right. The registrars, by law, receive the signed petitions on or before the deadline. And in the case of New Orleans, it's 180 days, which was Ash Wednesday. She received the petitions, and it's her job as registrar to verify the signatures, as well as all the other information that has to be on there, the address, the year of birth, ward and precinct, etc., and a witness's signature and a date. So all of that has to be just so, and that's the registrar's job to make sure that's right. But the registrar didn't explain up front, and this was a transparency issue, what is the process? What are the standards that she uses? She did kind of explain it after the fact, but it's the kind of thing that, frankly, she could have and I think should have explained on the front end. So that was a transparency issue. The judge didn't reveal her signing the signatures. The recall organizers didn't truthfully reveal how many signatures they had. You know, they kind of played hide the ball, and this went on all across the board. So I think transparency needs to be injected into this process.
And this, of course, was after agreeing to give the paper, you know, on
Yes.
February, which they didn't,
Yes.
you know, at
Well-
that date, ultimately did. But then there were two submissions to the registrars, one tranche of petitions, and then there's that 5-day period after the deadline of February 22nd where somebody could take their name off or put their name on with a letter saying that's what they wanted to do. The campaign gave a whole nother tranche, which turned out to be over 30,000 signatures, right?
I think it was 34,000 plus or 32,000 plus. That's another thing. This is not a grace period. It's not like, you know, arriving at school 5 minutes late and the teacher gives you a pass. It's specifically that 5-day period exists in the law only to add your name with a form filled out and a letter signed saying and dated, I want to add my name after the deadline, or removing your signature.
Right.
And the recallers took that as a grace period, which is what it's been referred to in the media. That's not really what it is, but they dumped a whole bunch of petitions that apparently arrived late, and they just put them in there.
And the registrar said most of
No.
those were duplicates and they could not be certified. And then we had Disney characters also signed.
Yeah, well, you know, if you're going to dump in, if you're going to make Xeroxes or photocopies and dump them in, why not let Scooby-Doo and Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble apply too?
And they did.
That's what happened.
For the most
Apparently they
part,
did.
aren't these laws written not to be successful?
Well, you can certainly impute that. I mean, and they used to be worse. It used to be you needed a third of the registered voters to recall somebody. In the last mayor's race, we didn't even get 30% turnout. So
there is legislation that could possibly come up. It's some Hollis,
yeah,
is that his?
State Representative Paul Hollis,
Paul
who
Hollis.
authored the law, I don't know if it was this past year or a year or two ago, lowering the threshold from 33% to 20%, which is more in line with what other states do, but plenty of states use 10 or 15%. And he's now looking at lowering it further. I think the legislature needs to look at all of these issues, some transparency. For example, I would recommend that if the recall organizers should have to turn in those petitions not all at once at the end, but maybe every 30 days, so that the public could get a running count, and there wouldn't be any mystique or mystery of how many signatures do they really have.
Right.
And it would give them a chance to go correct any that got invalidated. It would serve the public interest and the voters' interest, I think.
So learning a teaching moment. This just seems to have been really a very big teaching moment. We need to learn a lot and take away a lot from this.
I think so. And you know, where do we go from here? I think that really is up to the mayor. I'm assuming, as I think most people are, that this effort has failed. So how is the mayor going to change, if at all? Is she going to be somewhat conciliatory? Is she going to learn that, you know, maybe she could change the way she handles certain issues or a lot of issues, maybe the way she deals with other elected officials? We'll see.
Okay, of course, the campaign managers say they're continuing the fight and they're going to consider legal issues, but we'll
Yeah.
see where that goes. They also said they collected 100,000.
Well, that there is one example of a Louisiana mayor being recalled, and that was in 2014 in Port Allen, a woman named Dee Dee Slaughter. She'd been the mayor for a year, and she was recalled successfully.
They tend to succeed in smaller jurisdictions where it's
Yeah.
easier to get to that 20%.
Yeah.
It's better for a small town, yeah.
All righty. All right, Clarence, thanks a lot. Blake, over to you. And of course, a big issue in the city of New Orleans is crime, public safety, the police department with not enough people on it. Doesn't seem like other parishes in our region are having that same problem in terms of the numbers on their police departments.
That's right. We were interested at the paper, given the issues at NOPD in recruiting and retaining their officers, looking at how suburban police forces are faring. So I reached out to departments as small as Westwego, to JPSO and St. Tammany, and basically all of them say that they are pretty well staffed. They all have had their troubles the past 3 years with COVID and sort of the fallout from the George Floyd incident, and but they've rebounded and they're not seeing the same issues. I was interested in. I went to a graduation ceremony in Kenner for one of their academies, and I spoke to some of the officers there, and they had a choice. Some of them, if they wanted to, they could have gone and worked at NOPD and made a significant, a higher salary there. And the reasons they told me that they didn't were they were varied, but they sort of, some of them were that they worried about being on a force that was so understaffed and sort of what that meant for their own safety. If they needed backup, would they have someone to come help them? And then I met a woman who, she moved from Vermont to work for NOPD. She went through the entire process, academy, and she dropped out 2 weeks before she was set to graduate because she said the morale was just so depressing. She couldn't stomach it. She didn't want to stay there. And so she turned her sights on Kenner instead.
And so she's there in Kenner. That's something that we've heard from police officers or former police officers with NOPD. It's like, it's not so much the money, although of course certainly having a good salary definitely helps, but it's the morale. And then also if there's a problem, going through PIB and any sort of punishment that they might get or reprimand or something, that this has been a real problem. We're not seeing that with the other police departments around? In terms of morale?
Not in the same way, no. And I think the mayor has moved to try and get the consent decree lifted, saying sort of blaming that in some respect for some of the issues but yeah, you're right. We referenced in our story a survey that NOPD did last year that sort of it showed that pay was a distant third to sort of disciplinary issues and sort of leadership issues. Sort of whether you would get advanced to a higher position.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wonder if this makes a difference. And maybe it doesn't. Let me just throw it out. That suburban police departments, all the towns, as well as the parish itself, all have the head person is elected. If the sheriff is and if the police chiefs are. Whereas in the city, traditionally with a lot of cities, that they're appointed by the mayor. And does that make any difference in terms of the attitude towards the department? Like, does an elected police chief have more of a kinship with the people out there? I mean, having gone through electoral process, and sometimes it's like, who's this person as police chief or something? Or do you think it has no impact at all?
I mean, that's interesting. Something I heard when I was reporting this is sort of similar, but the difference between sort of a sheriff's office and a police force like Slidell, where in sort of a sheriff's office, it's sort of up to the sheriff to decide who gets a promotion or not. And, it's sort of, if you're in their good graces, then you advance through the ladder. But, a lot of these cities, they have civil service and, you advance through a system. So that was something I heard. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point whether, if an elected, police chief in New Orleans would sort of fare better.
I'll tell you what, anecdotally, a couple of days ago in a coffee shop, purely by chance, excuse me, I bumped into two ranking NOPD officers. I think they were like lieutenants. And both of them said, we need to have an elected chief. To your point, Errol, they said they felt it would make a big difference. Now, this is just anecdotally. I didn't bring it up. They did. They said the problem is there's too much politics in the office. If the chief was elected, you'd see faster response times, and because the chief would have to answer to the voters, not to the mayor.
Of course, now the mayor appoints the police chief, but now whomever she recommends is going to have to go before council. So it's not just the mayor. Council also is going to have a say.
That's true, but ultimately, once there, the chief answers to the mayor.
Correct. So. Absolutely. So one quick question for you. now Jefferson Parish, that's a pretty big parish. Of course, there are municipalities where they have their separate police departments, et cetera, but still the sheriff oversees the whole. And you took a look at the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office, right, and the deputies. How big is that one compared to New Orleans? And how what's the shortage there, I should put? What's their shortfall?
Well, in our story, we wanted to compare apples to apples. So the sheriff's office, of course, does enforcement, but they also run the parish jail. So we mainly looked at the enforcement side, and there they have around 600, 700 sort of officers in that, or deputies in that, doing those roles, and they were about 34 deputies short of reaching sort of their budgeted positions. However, in the correction side and running their jail, they still have pretty significant shortages there.
But then also within the sheriff's jurisdiction, there are city police departments too, so you have more police.
Right.
And so there's really two sets of police and sometimes, whereas in the city you don't have that.
Yeah, it's just the one. All righty. Okay, thanks a lot, Blake. All righty, Mike, your turn. And the big problem that this state is facing, certainly the southern part of the state, and that is homeowners insurance. And so you've been taking a look at that. To begin with, our insurance commissioner, long-term insurance commissioner, Jim Donelon, says not seeking re-election.
Yes, it seems so. He's taken himself off the board. From what I could divine from his press conference, it seemed like he was anticipating a little bit of political shenanigans in the upcoming regular session, and it seemed like this was his, attempt to give it one last hurrah and not have to be beholden to any of the demands from lawmakers. So he decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election, even though as recent as February, he said that he was in fact still running.
Yeah.
But the toll of the crisis has just been too demanding for him. So.
Because it has been a crisis. And, we've seen insurers leave the state, flee the state, go insolvent. And so Donelon has been trying to correct that, bringing back this incentive fund, which he was successful with to a point, because insurers say we need more money than what's in this fund.
Well, yes, the incentive fund is an interesting approach to take to trying to recruit insurers to come back to your state. Donelon deployed this method back in, I think, 2008 after Hurricane Katrina, and there was some moderate success where companies were attracted and they did write policies. Some of them, wrote more policies than they were required to write by the terms of the agreement. So this time, in redeploying it, he, through a special session, received an appropriation of $45 million to allocate to insurers who were interested, and it was oversubscribed. The insurers who lined up, 9 of them requested something like $62 million. So he's going back to the legislature to try and get the $17 million to hopefully distribute the money to all of the companies interested.
So what does this do with those insurers then? Those who take the money, are they going to take customers from Louisiana citizens, which is really, what is needed?
Yeah, well, the facet that's interesting about this latest sort of iteration of the incentive program is that it does not explicitly require them to take policies from Louisiana citizens. If you all, I don't know how closely people follow it, but Donelon's sort of rallying cry was that Louisiana citizens was going to be in some peril if they had to go into the next hurricane season with the reinsurance buy that they were anticipating. Reinsurance is coverage that insurers purchase to backstop their catastrophic losses. So in the event of a major storm, reinsurance kicks in and allows the insurance company to remain solvent because the policy, they basically collect on a policy to deliver on that service that they've promised the people. So Donelon is saying that our public insurer, Louisiana citizens, was going to be in great danger if they were going into the next hurricane season with more than 100,000. I believe it's up to 135,000 policyholders because of so many of the companies have failed, and all of the policyholders are basically being funneled into the insurer of last resort. So that was his pitch, was that that the public insurer was going to be in danger, but the provisions of the incentive program, unlike last time, don't require companies to take policies from citizens. So there's no guarantee that the load is going to be reduced in time for hurricane season. He's sort of betting on insurance companies basically honoring his request. Okay. It's sort of like a goodwill agreement. That
We hope. So then this incentive money basically, if new customers from Louisiana citizens are not automatically or are not going to be transferred to the existing insurers who are getting this money, does this money then just sort of ensure that these insurance companies will stay in Louisiana and will be able to honor claims? Is that the purpose of it?
Well, the way that the incentive works is that you are technically collecting 20% of the money every year. So they have to stay for at least 5 years. So if you get $10 million, you collect a percentage of that every year. Last time they paid all the money up front and then clawed back some of the money. So that ensures that they are at least here, unless they just bail. They decide that they can't do it and they sort of bail and just give the money back. That would be, another outcome to consider.
So this is helping, but we're not out of the woods yet in terms of our insurance crisis, it sounds like.
It's sort of a dicey hurricane season by hurricane season sort of projection at this point. If we see another insolvency or a few more insolvencies, that's going to put even more strain on an already strained system, and it could really, put Donelon's plan in some jeopardy.
Right. Okay, so we're hoping that the legislature then will come through with this extra money. I guess we're hoping.
Well, the legislature will convene next month, and there are a lot of proposals that are starting to rise. They haven't filed, there aren't many bills filed yet, but there are a few of long-term bills that they have in mind to try and shore up the quality of people's housing, help them get stronger roofs, but.
Okay, yeah, that's for another conversation because that will be interesting. So we'll see what does go through the
I just
legislature.
want to notice that this will be the end, as far as we know, of the Donelon family in politics.
That's
It
right.
goes back to Tom Donelon, no telling how many years.
Goes back a ways in Jefferson Parish.
And at the year of a
It does.
Jefferson Parish election, and so it went that long period, and then Jim Donelon was the last survivor of it.
Great.
So far, yes.
Yeah, maybe it will pop up.
Okay, let's go over to you now, Ian. Let's take a quick look at short-term rentals in New Orleans. What did council decide?
Well, what they decided is that one of the issues was having short-term rentals, but how many within what amount of density? And what they decided on is in a 4-block area, you can have a short-term rental. But there are some parts of town that there's more demands for short-term rentals. Okay? If you're in Marigny or if you're in the French Quarter, there's more people that want to do that. Other people really don't have much demand. And so there's a process where they can expand it. They have to apply and go before the council, where it can go up to 2 more. That's what they have. But the other issue, and this was the issue that was very contentious before, was that the original ordinance said that the owner of the short-term rental had to live on the property too. And they had to prove it by having a homestead exemption. And that went to the courts. And the court said, no, that's unconstitutional. So that was thrown out. And so what they said, okay, you don't have to live on the property per se, but the property in the house, in the residence, but you have to live in the property area, or a tenant has to live in the property area. And that could suffice for it. So they've had to resolve that. I can tell you, one time I had a relative that stayed in a bed and breakfast, and we brought into the bed and breakfast, and there was no evidence of anybody else in there. Okay, it was scary. Okay, I mean, not having anybody else in there. And the next day, I called the bed and breakfast, and I said, "Oh yeah, we had somebody who was staying in the back, And I don't think it happened. So it's really important to have some sort of acknowledged presence there.
Okay, so what council decided yesterday? I mean, obviously there are those who don't agree with it. Is this like the final say? Are we anticipating any kind of legal challenges to any of this? Do you know?
I think it's going to be a law. I think it's going to be a law for now. Yeah, because you got to do something. Okay, and they have to deal with it. I can say this, that in the neighborhood where I live, which is an old neighborhood in Mid-City, where you have a lot of double houses and single houses, which would be right for short-term rentals, and close to the streetcar line, I see a lot of those people who are staying there, and I personally think they're great because, you can tell they're tourists, they're friendly, and walking back and forth. And so I think they're good for a neighborhood, but in other places, maybe not so much.
Okay, all righty. Well, we'll see where that all goes. And quickly now over to you, Blake, because Jefferson Parish elections, it's going to be a pretty hot one this year for council.
That's right. That's right. All but the DA is up for re-election, up for election in October, and typically the parish presidency is the race people are focusing on. But Cynthia Lee Sheng doesn't look like she's going to draw a formidable competitor. So All eyes are on the parish council right now, and already we're seeing some pretty, it's 7 months out, and it's already getting pretty testy.
For at large.
For at large, that's right. Representing the entire parish, we have two incumbents that are facing 2 of their colleagues who are term limited in district council seats. So it's Scott Walker versus Dominic Impastato, and then incumbent Ricky Templet facing Jennifer Van Vranken. And yeah, it looks like it's going to be a pretty feisty and an expensive race. Very
expensive race. I mean, those are 4 really well-known names in Jefferson Parish. These are people who have been involved in city government for a while in one form or fashion. And then Jennifer Van Vranken initially wanted to run for lieutenant governor, but then Billy Nungesser said, no, I'm staying in and I'm running again. So she had to sort of redirect. So we anticipate a lot of money and a big political battle there.
That's right. Yeah, Jennifer Van Vranken put in about $500,000 into her campaign account at the very end of the year, I think anticipating that statewide run. But, she's keeping it in there. And, I was speaking to some political consultants working for all the candidates, and some of them think that it could get up to, some say maybe $750,000 will be the minimum to really run a competitive race, and some said even up to $1 million, which seems remarkable.
Now, Van Vranken is termed out, limited out in her district seat. And Impastato, he is too, as it turns out.
That's right. He came in middle of a term, but is just on the cusp of it basically qualifying for being 2 terms in. So.
Okay. All right. Good politics coming up ahead in Jefferson Parish. All right. Other stories. Over to you.
Today in City Park, something new opened called pickleball. There's been a high demand for pickleball. Pickleball is kind of like tennis. It's on a smaller court. It's easier on the legs, which is popular, but it still needs the same eye-hand coordination. And they opened 4 courts today. That's Stephanie Kimball there, and she's showing the racket and the ball. And it's popular around the country and growing. I actually have a pickleball here for the first time public TV. It's made out of hard plastic.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really, really popular.
So City Park has courts.
There's been a high demand. And
my wife's a huge fan. She plays it. She's been playing for over a year now.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
And the word pickle comes not from what you put on the sandwich, but from the founder's dog, was named Pickle. Anyway.
Okay. All right, Mike, over to you.
I'll be closely monitoring bills coming into the legislature as the day for the session sort of slowly approaches us. I believe it starts on April 10th. There'll be lots of bills. There's already lots of interest in insurance-related bills and proposals.
Always interested in insurance, that's for sure. Okay, Blake, over to you.
I think what we'll be following in the coming weeks are, the council members actually have a significant amount of discretionary funds they can spend. Some of them have upwards of $20 million in their accounts that they can spend on their districts. And so as we get closer to election time, we're going to see a lot more, pet projects coming out, trying to please their constituents.
And this is in JP you're talking about?
Jefferson Parish, that's right, yeah.
All righty. Clarence.
Well, tomorrow's election day in New Orleans. No matter where you live in the city, there's something on the ballot. Citywide, you have 2 races for judgeships, one at Civil District Court, which has 3 candidates, and another one at Criminal District Court, which also has 3 candidates. And if you live in House District 93, which is parts of Tremé, Marigny, the French Quarter, the CBD, Warehouse District, Lower Garden District, and parts of Gertown, very important House District runoff with very hotly contested between Alonzo Knox and Sybil Fox Richardson.
So go to the polls tomorrow if you're in Orleans Parish.
Yes.
Good turnout. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Great discussion. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.